One last thing that I wanted to point out about 7.3 before we move on to the lesson summary is the term clustering. So when data seems to have more than one pattern, we call that clustering. So looking at graph B, it looks like there's a pattern here and a pattern here. So we see a cluster and a cluster. C, we have a cluster and a cluster. D, we have a cluster and a cluster. So clustering, C-L-U-S-T-R-I-N-G, is what we use, the term we use to describe data that seems to have more than one pattern, okay? So usually clustering means that there are subgroups within our data that may represent different trends. So if we look at plot B, we could say that this data, let's say the data represents body measurements of a certain species of bird. So even though all of the data came from the same type of bird, it could be that this higher cluster represented male birds and the lower cluster represented female birds. Does that make sense? So clustering can reveal subgroups within a data set. Just something else for you to keep in mind. Okay, so looking at our lesson summary, sometimes a scatter plot shows an association that is not linear. We call such an association a nonlinear association. So nonlinear means not a straight line. In later grades, you will study functions that can be models for nonlinear associations. We're not worried about that right now. So in this graph, we can see that it looks like it's a curve. One straight line would not fit this data, so it's a nonlinear association. Sometimes in a scatter plot, we can see separate groups of points. We call these groups clusters. So you can see that here's a cluster, which they've outlined, and here's a cluster, which they've also outlined. Next, you're going to work on your cool down. Once you're finished with that, remember it's by yourself and individual. You need to be working silently and alone. Do not make me come back and read your name on the substitute's note that you cannot keep your mouth shut, please. So cool down first. Once you're finished with the cool down, turn it in. Homework is going to be lesson 7, practice problems, and your lesson 7, Khan Academy. All right?